"Pull the rope tighter," Duke Roland Ashcombe ordered, as two guards bound Eleanor Hart to the village bell tower. The plus-size maid had interrupted his daughter's engagement celebration by ringing the emergency bell and shouting that the mountain dam was failing. Now hundreds of villagers watched, while the Duke called her an attention-seeking fool. Nell's round, gentle face burned with humiliation, but she did not beg for release. Her father had spent his life building stone bridges, and the deep groan she had heard beneath the dam was not thunder. Roland announced that she would remain tied there until morning, as a warning to every servant who forgot her place. Laughter spread through the square. Then Nell looked down. 3 drops of muddy water pushed through a mortar joint at the tower's base, a joint that had remained dry for nearly 70 years. A second crack appeared beneath the Duke's polished boot. But when Nell warned him again, Roland's expression revealed something far more frightening than disbelief. He did not look toward the mountain. He looked at his pocket watch. For one brief moment, the Duke's cold face tightened with alarm. Then he glanced toward his estate steward, Silas Vane, who stood near the engagement carriage with pale stone dust clinging to his black boots. Vane gave an almost invisible shake of his head. The silent exchange lasted no more than a second, but Nell saw it clearly. "The water has reached the tower foundation," she said. "Untie me and move everyone to the eastern ridge." Roland stepped away from the spreading dampness as though it were merely rain. "You will not command me in my own village. Then send one man to inspect the lower spillway." The spillway was inspected this morning. By whom? Roland's eyes hardened. One of the guards pulled the rope so sharply that it cut into Nell's wrists. Several noble guests laughed again, relieved that the Duke still appeared in control. But the villagers had grown quiet. They knew Nell. For 7 years she had worked inside Ashcombe Manor, rising before dawn to light fires, carry coal, scrub floors, and care for guests who rarely remembered her name. Her full figure and cautious manner made her a favorite target for cruel jokes. Yet no family in the valley could recall her raising a false alarm. "My father helped repair the northern retaining wall," Nell called to the crowd. "He taught me the sound of stone shifting under pressure. I heard it beneath the reservoir." Roland seized the front of her plain gray uniform. "Your father was an illiterate laborer. He could read stone better than you read men." A shocked murmur moved through the square. Nell had never spoken to him with such open defiance. The Duke released her and turned to the villagers. "The woman is hysterical. She wandered away from her duties, mistook thunder for danger, and ruined the most important evening this valley has celebrated in a generation." Behind him, Lady Celeste Ashcombe stood beneath a flower-covered canopy beside her new fiancé, Lord Adrian Marlowe. Celeste's white engagement gown shimmered beneath hundreds of lanterns, but her smile had disappeared. "Father," she said, "perhaps we should postpone the feast until someone checks the dam." Roland answered without facing her. "There is no danger." Silas Vane approached and spoke loudly enough for the nobles to hear. "I inspected the reservoir myself. The wall is perfectly sound." Nell studied his boots. The dust was not ordinary road dirt. It was powdered limestone mixed with black grains, the same residue she had found beside 3 newly drilled holes along the lower retaining wall. Someone had attempted to conceal those holes with wet mortar. When Nell touched one of the patches earlier that evening, it had crumbled beneath her fingers. Before she could examine it further, she heard the deep groan travel through the stone and ran toward the village bell. She had not seen who damaged the wall, but Vane's boots placed him close to it. "Then show everyone your hands," Nell said. Vane stopped. "What? If you inspected the wall, show us your hands." The steward slowly removed one glove. His fingers appeared clean, yet the edge of his right thumbnail carried a thin black stain. Nell's father had used blasting powder when clearing stone from bridge foundations. She remembered how its residue settled beneath the nails and resisted ordinary washing. Vane quickly replaced his glove. Roland ordered the musicians to resume playing, but no one moved. The muddy line beneath the tower had widened. An elderly mason named Walter Reed knelt to touch it. He rubbed the water between his fingers and smelled it. "This came through fresh broken limestone," he said. Roland kicked his hand away from the crack. "You will remain silent unless asked." The casual cruelty turned uncertainty into fear. Mothers gathered their children. Several farmers began moving toward the road leading uphill, but armed estate guards lowered their pikes across the exit. Roland declared that no one would leave until the engagement toast had been completed. Nell realized he was not merely refusing to believe her. He needed the villagers to remain in the square, for some reason she did not yet understand. Perhaps he expected only a controlled release of water, or perhaps the danger had moved beyond his control, and he feared that an evacuation would expose what had been done to the dam. A deep vibration passed through the tower post against Nell's back. The great bronze bell moved without anyone touching its rope. One low note rolled across the valley. This time, no one laughed. Horses began pulling against their harnesses. Dogs barked from the surrounding cottages. On the distant mountainside, a line of birds rose from the forest and scattered across the darkening sky. Nell felt the mortar joint beneath her shoe open another fraction. Water surged through it in a thin brown stream. "The old drainage tunnel runs beneath this square," she shouted. "If the pressure reaches it, the ground will collapse before the main flood arrives." Roland ordered the guards to gag her. As one man approached with a folded cloth, a young stable worker named Daniel Reed slipped through the crowd and pointed toward the upper road. A rider was racing down from the reservoir, leaning desperately over his horse's neck. The animal reached the edge of the square before collapsing. Its rider struck the ground, rolled onto his side, and raised a blood-covered hand toward the bell tower. "The western gate has been destroyed," he gasped. Someone removed the iron braces. Silas Vane backed toward the engagement carriage. Duke Roland checked his watch again. Then, from high above Ashcombe Valley, came a sound like the mountain splitting open. The sound rolled down the mountain in a violent wave, shaking lanterns from their hooks and sending the musicians fleeing from the engagement platform. Duke Roland's guards abandoned Nell as the stones beneath the tower shifted. Daniel Reed rushed forward, drew the small stable knife he used for cutting harness leather, and sawed through the rope around her wrists. He had respected Nell since the winter his mother became ill, and Roland refused to advance the family a single week's wages. Nell had paid for the physician from her own savings, then worked Daniel's kitchen duties at night so the boy could remain beside his mother. He had trusted her long before she warned anyone about the dam. "Which way?" he asked as the rope fell. "The eastern ridge," Nell answered. "Keep everyone away from the stone bridge and the drainage tunnel." Roland shouted that the main road was safer, but Nell knew it descended toward the river before climbing again. If the dam released, the road would become a channel. She climbed onto the tower platform and pulled the emergency bell with both hands. Her wrists bled, and every movement sent pain up her arms. Yet she rang the old evacuation pattern her father had taught her as a child. 3 short strokes, 2 long, repeated without pause. The signal carried beyond the square toward farms hidden among the lower fields. Walter Reed and several laborers began directing families toward the ridge. Lady Celeste tore the jeweled train from her engagement dress so she could help an elderly woman walk, while Lord Adrian Marlowe stood beside his carriage, demanding that his trunks be loaded first. Nell saw the difference between them immediately. Roland seized Celeste's arm and ordered her into the ducal coach. "The celebration is over. We are returning to the manor. These people need help," she replied. "They are not our responsibility tonight." The words stunned even the noble guests. Roland's power depended on presenting himself as the valley's protector, yet danger had stripped away the performance. His only concern was leaving before the consequences reached him. Nell continued ringing until another tremor tilted the tower. Muddy water burst through the foundation crack and spread across the square. A section of paving stones dropped several inches as the old drainage tunnel began collapsing beneath them. 2 children fell into the opening. Nell released the bell rope and climbed down, though Daniel begged her to stay on the higher platform. She lowered her full figure onto the broken stones, braced her feet against opposite walls, and reached into the dark gap. The first child caught her hand. Nell lifted him high enough for Walter to pull him free, then returned for his younger sister. The ground shifted again, trapping Nell's left boot beneath a slab. Daniel could have followed the Duke's carriage to safety, but he knelt in the rushing mud and worked beside Walter until they freed her. By then, the ducal coach had departed along the private upper road with Roland, Vane, and Lord Adrian inside. Celeste had refused to go. She remained in the square, carrying children toward the ridge in her ruined white gown. Nell was the last household servant anyone expected to command a village, yet she knew which cottages held bedridden residents. which alleys ended at stone walls, and which families lacked horses. Years of quietly delivering meals, washing linens, and sitting beside the sick had given her a more accurate map of Ashcombe Valley than any noble possessed. She sent Daniel to the western cottages, Walter to the mill row, and Celeste toward the schoolhouse. When a farmer offered Nell the final seat in his wagon, she gave it to Mrs. Reed, whose weak lungs could not survive the climb on foot. Nell continued uphill beside the wagon, supporting an injured shepherd twice her age. This was why villagers trusted her. Her kindness was never performed before people who could reward it. Halfway to the ridge, she looked back and saw water pouring from the bell tower foundation. The main wall had not yet collapsed, but pressure from the reservoir was forcing itself through every buried channel beneath the village. They might have minutes or less. On the ridge, survivors gathered beneath oak trees while heavy rain began falling. Nell counted families and discovered that 6 laundry workers were missing from the riverside washhouse. She turned downhill, but Daniel blocked her path. "You have already gone back twice. They may not have heard the bell. Then I'll go. You don't know the service path." Nell took a coil of rope and returned alone. The washhouse stood beside the first bend of the river. She reached it as brown water surged over the bank. 4 women had climbed onto the roof, while 2 were trapped behind a jammed door. Nell secured the rope around a beech tree, crossed the flooded yard, and used an iron washing paddle to break the door hinges. She guided all 6 women along the rope before the current tore the building from its foundation. By the time she reached the ridge again, her uniform was ripped, her hair hung loose around her face, and blood from her wrists stained her sleeves. Roland would have called her clumsy and slow, but her strength had saved 8 lives before nightfall. Celeste placed her own velvet cloak around Nell's shoulders. "Why did my father refuse to evacuate us?" she asked. Nell remembered the documents she had dusted in Roland's study that morning. They included a survey commissioned by Marlowe Ironworks. Red ink divided the lower valley into mining plots, but the tenants' permanent occupancy rights prevented the land from being cleared. Beside the survey lay Roland's debt notices and Celeste's engagement agreement. The marriage would erase part of his debt if Marlowe obtained access to the limestone beneath the village. Nell had not understood why several cottages were crossed out and labeled after inundation. Now she did. "Your father needed this valley emptied," she said. Before Celeste could respond, Daniel arrived carrying a leather map case found where the ducal carriage had turned onto the upper road. Inside was the same Marlowe survey Nell had seen in Roland's study. A handwritten note, authorized payment to Silas Vane after the controlled release, destroyed the mill row and the tenant records office. The planned flood was supposed to occur after midnight, when Roland and his guests were safely inside the manor. Someone had removed too many braces, causing the failure to begin early. Nell looked toward the dam. Along its western face, a jagged black line opened beneath the reservoir. Water exploded through the stone. The Duke's scheme had escaped his control, and an entire wall of water began descending toward Ashcombe Valley. The flood struck the lower valley with the force of a moving cliff. Trees snapped beneath the brown surge, stone walls vanished, and the river rose over its banks in seconds. Nell shouted for everyone to climb beyond the first ridge. Her father had taught her that a dam break did not arrive as a single wave. Water trapped in side channels could gather and strike again, after survivors believed the danger had passed. Walter and Daniel repeated her warning, while Celeste led children toward the abandoned hillside chapel. Behind them, the bell tower gave one final mournful note before its foundation collapsed. The bronze bell crashed into the muddy square and disappeared beneath the current. Nell watched 7 years of familiar life vanish. The bakery where she collected morning bread, the schoolhouse whose windows she washed each spring, the cottages where generations of tenant families had lived. Her small room in the manor survived on higher ground, but everything she owned in the village laundry, a winter coat, her mother's wooden chest, and the blankets she stored for poor families, was swept away. When the first wave passed, several men tried to descend in search of livestock. Nell stopped them after noticing water collecting behind an old quarry embankment east of the mill. The ground there had become unnaturally still, while floating branches rotated in a tight circle. "The quarry tunnel is blocked," she said. "Pressure is building underneath it." A farmer accused her of inventing another danger, but Daniel stood beside her. Moments later, The embankment burst, and a second torrent crossed the path the men would have taken. Their anger turned to frightened respect. Nell organized the survivors into groups, placed injured people inside the chapel, and used torn pieces of Celeste's engagement decorations as bandages. She surrendered the dry velvet cloak Celeste had given her to wrap a shivering infant. Near midnight, a head count revealed that the village records keeper, Mr. Pritchard, was missing. The tenant deeds had been stored in his office beside the mill, exactly where Roland's note predicted the controlled flood would strike. Nell suspected he had tried to rescue them. She and Daniel followed the edge of the receding water and found Pritchard clinging to the branches of an uprooted apple tree. His leg was broken, but he was alive. The deed office was gone. Every document proving the villagers' permanent rights appeared to have been destroyed. Daniel still carried Roland's leather map case beneath his coat. Before they returned to the chapel, Nell removed the handwritten payment note and one page of the Marlowe survey. She wrapped them in oilcloth from Pritchard's satchel and told Daniel to conceal them inside his boot. "Why not show everyone now?" he asked. "Because Vane will come looking for this case," Nell replied. "Let him believe he recovered everything." Her caution proved justified at dawn. Duke Roland arrived from Ashcombe Manor with armed guards, Silas Vane, Lord Adrian, and Magistrate Bernard Locke. Instead of bringing food or blankets, Roland demanded that the survivors gather outside the chapel. He announced that an inspection of the damaged dam had uncovered evidence of deliberate sabotage. Vane produced a heavy masonry hammer, marked with the initials EH. Nell recognized it immediately. It had belonged to her father, Elias Hart, and she kept it inside a locked chest in her room at the manor. Black powder clung to its iron head. "This was found beside the destroyed western braces," Vane declared. Shock traveled through the crowd. Several villagers knew the hammer because Elias had used it while repairing their homes. Roland accused Nell of inheriting her father's resentment toward the Ashcombe family and destroying the dam to humiliate him during Celeste's engagement. "She rang the bell because she knew exactly when the explosion would occur," he said. "Her warning was not courage. It was preparation for an audience." Nell asked who had entered her room. Roland replied that no one required permission to search a servant's quarters. The answer confirmed that the hammer had been removed before or during the feast. Vane then presented a maintenance order, supposedly signed by Nell. It requested access to the dam's western gate and stated that she intended to inspect the structure alone. Magistrate Locke read it aloud. The signature resembled hers, but the writer had used her formal name, Eleanor Hart. Nell always signed household documents as Nell Hart, the name by which she had been known since childhood. She also noticed that the paper carried a pale watermark from Marlowe Ironworks, rather than Ashcombe Manor. Vane had prepared the evidence using Lord Adrian's stationery. Nell kept these observations to herself. Exposing them before Locke took custody would give Roland time to replace the document. She asked why a maid's request could authorize entry to a guarded dam. Vane claimed she had stolen the western gate key from his office. A guard displayed the missing key, allegedly found inside Nell's apron pocket, after Daniel cut her loose. The lie was impossible. Nell had changed into a clean apron immediately before the engagement banquet, and dozens of servants had seen that its pockets were empty. But frightened people were beginning to look at her differently. Their homes had been destroyed, and Roland was offering them someone close enough to blame. One grieving farmer shouted that Nell's knowledge of the dam had always been unnatural. Another demanded to know why she reached the ridge while his cattle drowned. The Duke had transformed her competence into evidence against her. Celeste stepped forward and accused her father of lying, but Roland ordered Adrian to remove her. When Celeste resisted, Adrian gripped her arm and reminded her that their engagement contract placed her travel and finances under her future husband's authority. Roland then dismissed Nell from Ashcombe's service, confiscated her unpaid wages as compensation for the flood, and revoked her right to live anywhere on estate land. She had lost her employment, her savings, her possessions, and the only home she knew before Locke formally placed her under arrest. Vane took the leather map case from Daniel and searched it. Finding no incriminating papers, he smiled with relief. Daniel kept his foot pressed firmly against the hidden evidence inside his boot. As the guards bound Nell's injured wrists, Mr. Pritchard regained consciousness inside the chapel and called her name. He had seen someone near the deed office shortly before the water struck. Roland tried to silence him, but the old records keeper pointed a trembling finger toward Silas Vane. "That man was not fleeing the flood," he said. "He was carrying the tenant deeds uphill before the dam ever broke." Silas Vane's face tightened, but he recovered before most people noticed. He told Magistrate Locke that Pritchard was injured, feverish, and confused by the flood. "I carried an empty deed box from the office because I hoped to save whatever records remained," he said. Pritchard tried to sit up, insisting that Vane had carried 3 red leather bundles before the first wave reached the mill. Roland ordered Dr. Mason, the estate physician, to sedate him. Nell objected, remembering that Pritchard had struck his head and should not be given an unknown sleeping preparation, but Locke warned her that another interruption would be treated as resistance. Vane bent near the old man and whispered something that caused him to fall silent. Nell saw Pritchard's eyes move toward his granddaughter, a 12-year-old girl standing among the displaced families. The child lived in a cottage owned by Roland. Vane had found another witness whose honesty could be controlled through someone he loved. The guards began leading Nell away from the chapel. She had taken only a few steps when she heard a sharp sound behind her. Not thunder or breaking timber, but the dry snap of a stone joint failing under sideways pressure. Nell turned toward the chapel's southern wall. A thin stream of dust fell from the arch above the doorway. The flood had saturated the hillside, and the building's foundation was beginning to slide toward the empty quarry. More than 80 survivors remained inside. "Everyone must leave the chapel," she said. Roland refused to delay her arrest. The building survived the flood. The hill beneath it did not. Vane laughed and told the crowd that Nell was inventing a second disaster to distract them from the first. Nell studied the doorway. The wooden door had fitted loosely when she entered during the night, but now its lower corner pressed tightly against the frame. The floor was shifting. A crack traveled from the window arch toward the roof beam, widening as she watched. "Daniel, open the eastern shutters," she called. "If they are jammed, break them. Celeste, move the children outside first." Roland ordered everyone to remain where they were. For several terrible seconds, the villagers hesitated between the Duke who owned their homes and the maid who had saved their lives. Then Walter Reed struck the eastern shutter with a bench. Daniel joined him, and Celeste began carrying children through the opening. Nell pulled against the guard holding her. "Untie my hands. The roof will fall toward the south aisle." The guard looked to Vane, who shook his head. Nell used her shoulder to knock the man off balance, and ran into the chapel with her wrists still bound. Her full figure and low center of gravity helped her remain upright on the tilting floor. She directed the injured toward the northern door, dragged a fallen cabinet away from the aisle, and lifted one end of a heavy pew so 2 trapped women could crawl free. Daniel returned despite her orders and helped carry Pritchard through the broken shutters. Nell was searching the vestry for the final child when the bell cot above the roof split apart. Celeste screamed her name. Nell wrapped herself around the girl and rolled beneath the stone altar as part of the ceiling crashed into the aisle. Dust swallowed the room. Walter and Daniel pulled them through a gap moments before the southern wall collapsed down the quarry slope. Had the survivors remained inside another minute, dozens would have died. Outside, the villagers surrounded Nell with gratitude, but Roland climbed onto a wagon and announced that his careful decision to relocate everyone had prevented a tragedy. Lord Adrian praised the Duke's leadership and ordered his servants to distribute blankets bearing the Marlowe crest. When Daniel shouted that Nell had recognized the danger, Roland replied, "A frightened animal also runs before an earthquake. Instinct is not intelligence." Several nobles laughed. The Duke had stolen her achievement while reducing the knowledge inherited from her father to a servant's panic. Nell did not argue. The survivors were alive, and their memory of what happened mattered more than Roland's speech. Her silence irritated him more than anger would have. He ordered Walter and Daniel arrested as suspected accomplices in the dam sabotage. Celeste protested, but Adrian announced that their wedding would take place the following afternoon, instead of 3 months later. Once married, Celeste would leave Ashcombe Valley and reside under his authority at Marlowe House. The sudden ceremony was designed to remove the only noble witness willing to challenge Roland before she could speak to anyone outside the estate. Nell was taken uphill toward Ashcombe Manor, with Walter and Daniel walking in chains behind her. Along the road, she noticed fresh wagon tracks leading from the flooded records office toward the manor's abandoned glasshouse. Red sealing wax had flaked into the mud beside one wheel. Pritchard had described the tenant deeds as red leather bundles sealed with the village mark. Vane had not saved them from the flood. He had stolen them before it began and transported them somewhere on the estate. Nell deliberately stumbled near one wax fragment and covered it with her skirt. When the guard pulled her upright, she closed her fingers around the piece. The impression showed half of the village's oak tree seal. At the manor, Roland separated the prisoners. Walter was taken to the stable cells, Daniel to the gatehouse, and Nell to a locked storeroom beneath the western conservatory. Celeste followed long enough to press a small iron key into Nell's bound hand. "It opens my mother's writing cabinet," she whispered. "She investigated my father's debts before she died." Vane moved the cabinet into the abandoned glasshouse this morning. Adrian dragged Celeste away before she could explain more. Nell hid the key inside the torn lining of her sleeve. Through the storeroom wall, she heard Vane speaking with Roland in the adjoining passage. Vane reported that the flood had destroyed the tenant office, but not the Eastern Quarry Bridge. Marlowe's surveyors could not begin work, while that bridge allowed villagers and royal inspectors to enter the disputed land. "Then finish it tonight," Roland said. "Use the remaining powder and leave enough evidence to make it appear that Nell's accomplices continued her work." Nell looked toward the barred window. Below it, carts loaded with displaced families were already crossing the Eastern Quarry Bridge in search of shelter. Roland's next act of sabotage would not merely destroy evidence. It would kill the very people Nell had just saved. Nell waited until Roland and Vane's footsteps disappeared, then tested the storeroom door with her shoulder. The oak was too thick to break, and the barred window opened onto a drop above the conservatory garden. She searched the room for anything that could carry a warning, but it held only broken chairs, empty coal baskets, and a rusted length of iron used to stir the old furnace. Before she could use it against the window bars, a key turned in the lock. Celeste slipped inside, wearing a dark traveling cloak over her engagement gown. Her lip was bleeding where Adrian had struck her for resisting him. "My father has doubled the guards at the bridge," she whispered. "He told Adrian they are protecting the refugees." Celeste had stolen the storeroom key from Vane's desk and risked imprisonment by returning. Nell urged her to ride away and seek outside help, but Celeste refused to abandon the villagers. Together they crossed the servants' corridor and left through the conservatory door. Nell sent Celeste toward the refugee carts, with instructions to move everyone off the eastern bridge without creating a panic. She then climbed the wooded slope above the quarry, following a maintenance path her father had used years earlier. Rain made the stones slippery, yet she reached the bridge before Vane's men completed their work. 2 laborers were packing blasting powder into holes drilled beneath the central arch. A black fuse ran toward a lantern hidden behind the parapet. Nell recognized one laborer as Caleb Moss, a quarryman whose family owed Roland 3 years of rent. The other man wore a Marlowe Company coat. "There are families on that bridge," Nell said. Caleb lowered his tools, horrified to see her. He claimed Vane told him the bridge had been cleared, and the powder was intended only to remove a damaged support. The Marlowe man drew a pistol and lit the fuse. Nell knocked the lantern from his hand, but the burning cord had already caught. She seized a stone chisel and cut through the first fuse. A second cord, concealed beneath the parapet, continued hissing toward the southern arch. Celeste shouted from below as carts began turning back. Nell ran across the bridge against the escaping crowd, forcing herself through frightened families while searching for the hidden line. She found it beneath a wagon carrying 6 children. With no time to untie the horses, she crawled beneath the wheels, tore the fuse from the powder hole, and crushed the flame beneath her bleeding palm. A third explosion erupted behind her. The northern parapet burst outward, throwing Nell across the roadway and sending Caleb into the quarry. Walter Reed, who had escaped the stable cell during the confusion, caught Caleb with a length of harness rope before he fell beyond reach. Part of the bridge collapsed, but the main arch remained standing. Every refugee reached the eastern side alive. Nell rose through the smoke with black powder covering her dress, and the burning fuse still clenched in one hand. Duke Roland arrived at precisely that moment with Magistrate Locke, Lord Adrian, Vane, and a company of armed guards. Their speed proved they had been waiting nearby for the blast. Roland pointed at Nell and accused her of attempting to complete the destruction of Ashcombe Valley. The Marlowe laborer immediately swore that Nell had carried the powder to the bridge and threatened him when he tried to stop her. Caleb began protesting, but Vane reminded him that his wife and infant remained inside an estate cottage. The quarryman lowered his eyes and said he had seen nothing. Walter shouted that Nell had cut the fuses, yet Locke ordered him beaten and restrained. Celeste stepped between Nell and the guards. "I released her because I heard Father order the explosion." Adrian slapped Celeste before the assembled refugees and declared that his future wife was suffering from hysteria, brought on by the flood. No noble intervened. Roland produced a packet of letters allegedly found inside Nell's room. They described a conspiracy involving Nell, Walter, Daniel, and unnamed tenant leaders who planned to destroy the dam, blame the Duke, and seize control of the quarry. One letter ordered the eastern bridge demolished if the first flood failed to remove it. The writing imitated Nell's hand, but each page bore the watermark of Marlowe Ironworks. Locke refused to let her point it out. The magistrate announced that the powder on Nell's clothing, the burning fuse in her hand, her father's hammer at the dam, and the letters in her room formed an unbroken chain of evidence. He added attempted mass murder to the accusations against her. The refugees Nell had just saved remained silent. Many had watched her crawl beneath the children's wagon, yet their homes, food, and future employment belonged to Roland. One by one, they stepped back when Locke asked who would testify for her. Even Caleb denied that she had stopped the blast. Their fear wounded Nell more deeply than the Duke's insults. Roland ordered the guards to drag her through the ruined village, so everyone could see the criminal responsible for their suffering. He also announced that Celeste's wedding would proceed at noon, and that Adrian would assume legal authority over her immediately afterward. Nell was taken to an iron holding cage inside the manor's old carriage house, where servants and wedding guests could pass and mock her. Her wages were gone, her home had been revoked, and now a conviction for attempted mass murder could send her to the gallows. Vane visited shortly before sunrise and tossed the broken piece of red sealing wax into the mud outside her cage. "The tenant deeds no longer matter," he said. "By tomorrow, Lord Adrian will own the quarry, and every witness will belong to him." When he turned away, Nell noticed that his right boot was missing a brass heel plate. She remembered the newly drilled holes at the dam and the pale stone dust on his boots during the engagement feast. If the plate had broken while he worked there, it might still be trapped inside one of the hurried mortar patches. Unlike testimony, metal could not be frightened into changing its story. Then Celeste's iron key shifted inside Nell's torn sleeve. The key opened her mother's writing cabinet in the abandoned glass house, where Vane had moved it before the flood. Nell now knew the cabinet, the stolen tenant deeds, and whatever the late Duchess had discovered were likely hidden in the same place. Defending herself before Locke would accomplish nothing. She needed to reach the glass house before the wedding, recover evidence no magistrate could dismiss, and expose Roland in front of every noble whose signature was required to transfer the valley. Nell waited until the wedding musicians entered the manor before trying the cage door. Daniel appeared beneath the carriage house window, dressed in a groom's coat stolen from the laundry. He had loosened a rotten board in the gatehouse wall, crawled through a feed passage, and reached the stables without being seen. Using a narrow harness tool, he lifted the cage latch, while two sympathetic servants distracted the guards with a runaway horse. "Walter is alive," he whispered, "but Locke has ordered him moved after the wedding." Nell told Daniel about the glass house, the late Duchess's cabinet, and the possibility that Vane's missing heel plate remained inside the damaged dam. They crossed the orchard separately and met behind the abandoned glass house. Wagon tracks scarred the wet ground, and fragments of red sealing wax lay beside the door. Celeste's iron key opened the entrance, as well as the writing cabinet inside, proving that both locks had once belonged to her mother's private rooms. The glass panes were clouded with years of dirt, but recent footprints covered the floor. Behind dead vines and broken gardening tables stood 3 red leather bundles, rescued from the village records office. Pritchard had told the truth. Roland had stolen the tenant deeds before the flood, so he could later claim they were destroyed. Nell did not open them immediately. She crossed to a walnut writing cabinet, hidden beneath a canvas sheet, and used Celeste's key on its lower drawer. Inside were letters written by the late Duchess Helena Ashcombe, survey maps of the reservoir, copies of Roland's debts, and a report prepared by an independent engineer 3 months before Helena's death. The engineer warned that blasting near the western braces could destabilize the limestone shelf beneath the dam. A major release would not end at Ashcombe Valley. It could collapse the Raven Gorge farther downstream, blocking the river with thousands of tons of rock. Water would collect behind that natural barrier until it burst, sending a second and larger flood toward 3 market towns, a military hospital, and more than 2,000 residents. Helena had begged Roland to cancel his agreement with Marlow Ironworks. Her final letter stated that if he proceeded, she would deliver the evidence to a royal commissioner. She died in a carriage accident the following week. Nell looked through the dirty glass toward the southern horizon. The river below the valley should have been roaring after the dam failure, yet the gorge had become strangely quiet. Birds circled above a wall of dust in the distance. The report's warning had come true. The Raven Gorge had collapsed, and the river was already forming a temporary lake behind it. Daniel asked how long they had. Nell studied the engineer's elevation marks. Perhaps 6 hours, less if the rain continues. The report showed an abandoned quarry channel, capable of diverting part of the trapped water into an empty eastern basin, but its control wheel was located beneath Ashcombe Manor, inside the old wine vault. Opening it required access to the estate's underground sluice mechanism and enough workers to clear decades of rust. Roland would never permit the wedding guests to discover that his sabotage threatened the entire county. Nell gathered the engineer's report, Helena's letters, and several original tenant deeds. Daniel wrapped them in canvas and prepared to carry them to the hillside chapel ruins, where Pritchard could authenticate the seals. Before they reached the door, Silas Vane stepped from behind a row of dead orange trees with a pistol in his hand. 2 Marlow guards entered behind him, carrying cans of lamp oil. Vane admitted that he had moved the cabinet and deeds to the glasshouse, so they could be destroyed after the wedding contracts were signed. He had not expected Celeste to remember her mother's key. "Give me the report," he ordered. Nell placed herself between the gun and Daniel. She offered Vane the canvas bundle if he allowed the boy to leave. Vane agreed, but as Daniel approached the door, one guard struck him across the head. Vane took the documents, poured lamp oil over the cabinet, and set the curtains alight. He intended to burn Nell and Daniel with the evidence, then claimed that the escaped saboteur had destroyed another estate building. The guards barred the door from outside. Flames climbed the dry wooden frames and raced across the glasshouse roof. Daniel lay unconscious while thick smoke filled the room. Nell dragged him toward a stone planting trough and used the iron key to break the weakest pane near the floor. The opening was too narrow for her full figure, so she wrapped her hands in canvas and tore away jagged pieces until she could force her shoulders through. She crawled outside, reached back through the smoke, and pulled Daniel after her, seconds before the roof collapsed. The red deed bundles and cabinet disappeared in the flames, but Vane had overlooked the inner lining of Helena's document drawer. Before he arrived, Nell had slipped one engineer's map and Helena's final letter beneath her uniform. Daniel had also concealed an original tenant deed inside his boot. Their fragile evidence survived again, because Vane believed servants too frightened to plan ahead. Wedding guests rushed from the manor as smoke rose above the orchard. Roland immediately accused Nell of setting the fire and attempting to destroy proof of her conspiracy. Locke ordered the guards to seize her, while Vane displayed the burned canvas bundle as though he had heroically recovered it. Nell shouted that the Raven Gorge had collapsed, and thousands of people downstream required evacuation. Roland called it another lie invented by a desperate prisoner. Lord Adrian examined the distant dust cloud and realized she was telling the truth. Instead of warning the towns, he demanded that Roland complete the marriage and sign the quarry transfer before royal officials arrived. The nobles began arguing, servants panicked, and Celeste refused to approach the altar. Nell showed the engineer's map to the crowd and pointed out the rapidly rising water marked against the gorge elevations. The only safe release required opening the abandoned quarry channel from beneath the manor. Roland tore the map from her hands and threw it into the glasshouse fire. "There is no second flood," he announced, "and if one comes, this woman caused it." A mounted messenger arrived from Raven Gorge before the paper finished burning. The landslide lake had risen 20 feet in less than an hour, and the military hospital downstream had no warning system. Locke still ordered Nell arrested. As guards closed around her, Roland commanded Vane to seal the wine vault and remove the sluice wheel, so no one could prove the emergency channel existed. Nell realized the Duke would rather sacrifice 3 towns than allow investigators to discover why the dam had failed. The personal battle for her innocence had become a race to save an entire county, and the only path to the control mechanism now ran directly beneath the wedding hall, filled with Roland's armed men. Celeste stepped away from the wedding altar and tore the engagement veil from her hair. "No marriage will take place while people are about to die," she declared. Lord Adrian ordered 2 guards to restrain her, but the Ashcombe servants moved between them. They had watched Nell rescue children from the collapsing chapel, save families on the quarry bridge, and crawl from a burning glasshouse carrying Daniel. Roland still owned their cottages and wages, yet fear of losing everything no longer outweighed what they had seen. Walter Reed, bruised from his imprisonment, entered the hall with nearly 40 displaced villagers behind him. He demanded that Nell be allowed to open the emergency channel. Magistrate Locke threatened mass arrests, but the messenger from Raven Gorge announced that the county military commander would hold every person in the manor responsible if the hospital received no warning. Roland finally agreed, though he insisted that Vane and armed guards accompany Nell. She descended through the servants' staircase rather than the ceremonial wine entrance. Years of scrubbing those narrow steps had taught her which landing concealed the old service door. Celeste's iron key fitted its lock. The late Duchess had possessed access not only to the glasshouse cabinet, but also to the underground mechanism, suggesting Helena had investigated the dam far more deeply than Roland realized. Beyond the door, water dripped through a vaulted passage lined with limestone. The emergency spindle stood at the center of the wine vault, but Vane had already removed its control wheel and thrown it into a flooded shaft. "It cannot be opened," he announced with satisfaction. Nell examined the square iron head of the spindle. Rust sealed its edges, but the metal itself remained intact. She ordered the servants to bring lamp oil, fireplace pokers, a wagon jack, and the long iron roasting spit from the kitchen. Roland laughed when he saw the collection. "The county will drown while a maid plays at engineering." Nell ignored him. She cleaned the spindle, fitted the roasting spit through its central opening, and used the wagon jack to apply steady pressure, rather than striking the brittle mechanism. Walter and Daniel added the fireplace pokers as handles. At first, nothing moved. Then the rust cracked with a sound like breaking ice. Servants, villagers, and even wedding musicians leaned their weight against the improvised wheel. Nell stood at the center, directing them to turn slowly, so the ancient gears would not shear. The spindle rotated. Deep beneath the manor, stone gates began opening for the first time in 70 years. A roar traveled through the floor as trapped water entered the abandoned quarry channel and poured toward the empty eastern basin. The messenger galloped back to Raven Gorge. 2 hours later, a signal fire appeared on the ridge. The landslide lake had stopped rising. The military hospital and 3 downstream towns were safe. Lord Adrian immediately praised Roland for authorizing the release. The Duke stepped before the wedding guests and claimed that his knowledge of the estate mechanism had prevented catastrophe. He described Nell as a laborer who had merely followed his instructions. This time, however, no one applauded. Every person in the cellar had seen Roland order Vane to disable the wheel and watched Nell rebuild it with household tools. Her achievement could be stolen in words, but not erased from their shared memory. When the immediate danger passed, Nell turned the rescue into an investigation. She asked the messenger to request an independent military engineer from the hospital, ensuring that the damaged dam would not be examined solely by Roland's men. She placed Helena's surviving letter in Pritchard's custody because he was the official keeper of village records. Daniel surrendered the original tenant deed from his boot before 12 witnesses, each of whom signed a statement describing its condition and the place it had been found. This created a clear chain of custody that Locke could not secretly break. Pritchard authenticated the red wax village seal, paying off his earlier testimony that Vane had removed the deed bundles before the flood. The document proved that residents possessed permanent occupancy rights and that Roland could not legally clear the lower valley for Marlowe's quarry. Nell then confronted the forged maintenance order used against her. Its Marlowe Ironworks watermark matched the paper in Adrian's wedding contracts, while the manor duty book confirmed that Nell had been serving breakfast when the supposed request was delivered. Celeste and 6 servants signed statements verifying her location. 2 pieces of the trap were now exposed: the stolen deeds and the false order. By late afternoon, Captain Elias Ward and a military engineer arrived from the hospital. Roland tried to forbid them from entering the dam grounds, but the captain invoked emergency authority because the damaged reservoir threatened a military road. Nell led the inspection along the same path she had walked before ringing the bell. Fresh mortar covered 3 drilled holes near the western braces. The engineer removed the first patch and found blasting residue mixed with limestone dust. Inside the second hole lay a bent brass heel plate bearing the maker's number and 2 initials, SV. Vane looked down at his right boot, which was missing precisely that piece. He claimed Nell had planted it, but the plate was embedded behind mortar, already hardened before her arrest. The engineer estimated it had been trapped there when someone knelt beside the drilled hole and sealed it. Nell had noticed the missing plate, now the stone preserved where Vane had lost it. At the third hole, Daniel found fibers from a black wool glove. Vane's right glove had a fresh tear along the palm. These clues placed him at the sabotage site, but Vane insisted he had inspected the holes after Nell drilled them. Direct proof still required showing who purchased the blasting powder, who ordered the western braces removed, and why Vane expected the release after midnight. Investigators searched the maintenance shed and discovered that the powder register had been torn apart. Only the final page remained, showing a delivery of 12 crates authorized under a code rather than a name. The code, RA-117, could mean Roland Ashcombe, but the Duke claimed it referred to Reservoir Allocation 17. Without the missing pages, the interpretation remained uncertain. Captain Ward agreed to delay Nell's transfer until the evidence could be reviewed, offering the first fragile hope of a fair hearing. That hope came at a cost. Locke ordered Daniel and Walter held as material witnesses, preventing them from protecting their displaced family. Adrian froze Celeste's personal accounts and announced that if she continued opposing the marriage, every servant who supported her would be dismissed without shelter. Nell returned to the damaged manor under guard, knowing that each ally now suffered because of her investigation. As darkness fell, Pritchard examined Helena's letter beside the surviving tenant deed. He noticed a row of tiny pinpricks along the letter's edge. When placed over the engineer's map, the holes marked a location beneath the ruins of the village bell tower. Helena had hidden something there before her death. But the bell tower now lay under 20 feet of floodwater and collapsed stone, and Roland had just ordered Vane to recover it before morning. Nell asked Captain Ward to place guards around the bell tower ruins, but Magistrate Locke declared that the flooded village remained Ashcombe property and ordered the soldiers off the estate. The immediate threat to the military hospital had passed, limiting the captain's emergency authority. While officials argued over jurisdiction, Vane sent quarry workers into the water, under cover of darkness. By the time Captain Ward obtained permission to return, the men had already recovered a small iron box from beneath the tower foundation. Vane delivered it directly to Roland. Pritchard's marked letter and the engineer's map were then seized from the old records keeper on the claim that stolen Ashcombe documents belonged to the Duke. Locke also confiscated the surviving tenant deed and placed it inside his evidence chest. Nell protested that 12 witnesses had signed its custody statement, but the magistrate arrested Pritchard for possessing estate property and dispersed the witnesses before they could object. At sunrise, Roland convened a public inquiry in the manor courtyard. He displayed the iron box recovered from the bell tower and claimed its contents proved Nell's guilt. Inside were letters describing a plan to weaken the dam, seize the tenant deeds, and incite the villagers against their duke. Each carried an imitation of Nell's signature. Roland said Helena had discovered the conspiracy before her death and hidden the papers beneath the tower, hoping they would one day expose the Maid's family. The story made little sense. Nell had been only 18 and had not yet entered Ashcombe service when Helena died, but Locke refused to let her question the dates. The magistrate then announced that the brass heel plate found inside the mortar could not be admitted because its location had not been continuously guarded after the flood. Vane suggested Nell's allies had placed it there during the rescue. The torn glove fibers disappeared from the engineer's evidence envelope, and the blasting residue sample was contaminated when a guard dropped it into mud. Captain Ward's engineer objected, but Roland accused the military party of exceeding its authority and ordered them from the estate. Lord Adrian produced a statement from Marlow Ironworks claiming that the RA-17 code referred to a routine reservoir allocation. Every clue Nell assembled was stolen, altered, or buried beneath a title more powerful than hers. Roland then offered emergency food and temporary cottages to the displaced families, but only if they signed new agreements surrendering their permanent occupancy rights. Parents with hungry children lined up reluctantly. Those who refused received nothing. One by one, the Duke obtained through desperation what the stolen deeds had denied him. When Celeste tried to distribute food without conditions, Adrian locked her inside her bedroom. He announced that the wedding would proceed at noon the following day, and that Celeste's refusal would be treated as evidence of mental incapacity. Roland had transformed the methods used against Nell into a weapon against his own daughter. Daniel and Walter were sentenced to 6 months of hard labor for obstructing the bridge guards. Pritchard was denied a physician. Captain Ward was ordered back to the hospital. Nell's preliminary hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. Locke accepted the forged letters, the hammer, the planted gate key, and the testimony of Roland's employees as sufficient proof that she had destroyed the dam and attempted to murder the refugees. She would be transferred to the county prison immediately after Celeste's wedding, then tried on charges carrying a death sentence. Before the crowd, Roland approached Nell's chains and reminded everyone that she had begun the disaster by ringing the bell. A servant who mistakes noise for wisdom, he said, eventually becomes deaf to the truth. The villagers lowered their eyes. Even those Nell had saved were too frightened or hungry to defend her. She was taken to a basement cell beneath the carriage house, this time with 2 guards outside and iron fixed around one ankle. Rainwater crept across the floor. Through the wall, she heard Daniel coughing in the neighboring cell and Walter trying to comfort him. Her resistance had not restored a single home. Roland controlled the relief food. Adrian would obtain the quarry. Celeste would lose her freedom, and the men who trusted Nell faced hard labor. For the first time since hearing the dam groan, she wondered whether silence might have caused less suffering. Daniel seemed to sense her despair. "My mother is alive because you refused to look away," he said through the wall. "Those children on the bridge are alive. The hospital is still standing. He can steal the credit, but he cannot make those people dead again." Nell rested her head against the cold stone and allowed herself several quiet tears. Then she forced herself to examine the details Roland wanted everyone to accept. Helena supposedly hid accusations against Nell beneath the tower more than 10 years ago, before the 2 women had ever met. Vane recovered the box from a foundation submerged in muddy water. Yet the forged letters inside were perfectly dry, even though the box lid was rusted and its seal broken. Most revealing of all, the pinpricks in Helena's genuine letter did not mark the tower foundation. Pritchard had aligned the paper with the engineer's map incorrectly, because its upper corner was missing. Nell remembered the original map from her father's workshop. When rotated toward true north, the holes pointed to the bronze bell itself. Elias Hart had repaired that bell's iron clapper shortly before Helena died. He once told Nell that the clapper's heavy counterweight was hollow and sealed with a threaded cap so its balance could be adjusted. Helena had hidden the iron box beneath the foundation as a decoy. Whatever she truly wanted protected had been placed inside the bell her trusted mason repaired. Vane's men believed the bell lost beneath the flood, but Nell had watched where it fell when the tower collapsed. It rested below the old square, near the entrance to the drainage tunnel. Roland had overlooked it because he searched for documents in the ground, rather than listening to the final clue Helena left behind. Nell wiped her face and examined the iron ring around her ankle. The chain was strong, but its floor bolt had been fitted into limestone softened by floodwater. She would not need to break the metal. She needed leverage to remove the stone around it. Above her, wedding servants began arranging chairs for Roland's final victory. Nell's gentle expression settled into controlled resolve. If she could reach the drowned bell before noon, Helena's hidden evidence could turn that wedding into the public reckoning Ashcombe Valley had been denied. Nell worked the floor bolt back and forth until the flood-softened limestone began crumbling around it. Daniel understood her plan from the scraping sound and started coughing violently in the neighboring cell. Walter called for a guard, claiming the boy could not breathe. When one man unlocked Daniel's door, Walter threw his shoulder against it and pinned him between the iron bars and the wall. The second guard entered with a club, but Nell tore the loosened bolt from the floor, swung the attached chain around his ankles, and pulled him down. She took the keys without striking either man. Once Daniel and Walter were free, Nell locked the guards inside the empty cells and told Walter to find Pritchard, Captain Ward, and every witness willing to speak at the wedding. She and Daniel slipped through the stable yard beneath carts carrying flowers and reached the flooded village by the old shepherd's path. Opening the quarry channel had lowered the water enough to expose the upper half of the collapsed bell. It lay on its side beneath broken tower stones, surrounded by deep mud and tangled rope. Daniel wanted to enter first, but Nell knew the arrangement of the clapper because she had listened to her father describe the repair. She tied a rope around her waist, stepped into the freezing water, and crawled inside the bronze shell. Mud pressed against her shoulders, and the narrow space forced her to move slowly, but her hands found the iron clapper hanging at an angle. Its counterweight carried two shallow notches made by Elias Hart's chisel. Nell inserted the broken floor bolt between them and turned. At first, the threaded cap refused to move. Daniel and two villagers who had followed them pulled on the safety rope while Nell used both hands. Rust cracked. The cap loosened, and a sealed lead cylinder slid into her palm. Helena's true evidence had survived inside the bell, exactly where Roland never thought to search. Nell did not open it beside the river. If she broke the seal alone, Roland would accuse her of creating whatever lay inside. She wrapped the cylinder in her wet apron and carried it unopened toward Ashcombe Manor. Along the route, she protected the evidence by gathering witnesses. Pritchard examined Helena's crest, pressed into the lead seal, and signed a description of its untouched condition. Captain Ward and his engineer added their signatures. The village blacksmith confirmed that the corrosion on the threaded cap had not been disturbed in years. Daniel carried the cylinder inside a transparent glass lantern case, so everyone could see that no document was inserted or removed. Meanwhile, Walter escorted the refugees away from the quarry road before Roland could use them as hostages. Celeste's wedding had already begun. When Nell reached the manor, the great hall was crowded with nobles, Marlowe investors, estate council members, servants, and tenant representatives forced to attend. Celeste stood before the altar in her damaged engagement gown, her face pale and expressionless. Adrian held her wrist while the priest asked whether she entered the marriage willingly. Before she could answer, the doors opened. Nell walked into the hall wearing a torn, mud-covered maid's uniform, with her full figure bruised from the flood and iron marks still circling her wrists. Locke shouted for her arrest, but Captain Ward entered behind her with armed soldiers and declared that the evidence concerned a county-wide disaster threatening military property. He did not announce Roland's guilt. He merely guaranteed that Nell would be allowed to present what she had found. Roland delivered one final attack. He called her a clumsy, delusional servant who had caused a flood, burned a glass house, destroyed a bridge, manipulated his daughter, and now desecrated Helena's memory to avoid the gallows. "Look at her," he told the room. "She crawls from the mud carrying rubbish and expects noble blood to kneel before a maid." Nell answered quietly, "No one needs to kneel. They only need to listen." She asked Roland to confirm that the iron box recovered by Vane contained everything Helena had hidden at the bell tower. Confident that the real evidence had been destroyed by the flood, he swore before the priest and council that the box was genuine, unopened, and found exactly where Helena's pinprick map indicated. Vane repeated the oath. Nell then revealed that the letters inside named her as a conspirator 10 years before she entered Ashcombe's service. The paper bore a Marlowe watermark introduced only 5 years earlier, a fact Lord Adrian's own printer reluctantly confirmed. The letters had remained dry inside a rusted box filled with fresh river mud, proving the container was planted after the flood. Roland claimed Helena might have predicted Nell's future employment, provoking nervous laughter rather than agreement. Nell next dismantled the bridge accusation. Celeste testified that she released Nell after hearing Roland order Vane to use the remaining powder. Caleb Moss entered under Captain Ward's protection and admitted that Vane hired him to drill the bridge, falsely assuring him it had been cleared. The military engineer presented a detailed sketch and signed measurements of the brass heel plate embedded inside the dam mortar. The plate's maker appeared in person and confirmed that its serial number belonged to the custom boots purchased by Silas Vane. Fibers taken from Vane's torn glove matched those recovered from the drilled hole, before Locke's evidence envelope was altered. Locke tried to leave, but Mercer, summoned by Walter from a neighboring district, blocked the door with a lawful warrant issued after Captain Ward reported the magistrate's interference. Pritchard demanded the return of the tenant deed from Locke's evidence chest. When the chest was opened before witnesses, the original document was missing, replaced by blank parchment. Locke blamed a clerk, but the custody statement signed by 12 villagers proved that the sealed deed had entered his possession. Roland's carefully constructed story was coming apart in stages: the false letters, the planted hammer, the forged maintenance order, the sabotaged bridge, the stolen deeds, and the corrupted magistrate. Still, he insisted there was no direct proof that he ordered the dam destroyed. He declared that Helena had trusted him completely and had never accused him of endangering the valley. Nell turned toward Daniel. He placed the lantern case on the altar between Celeste and Adrian. In full view of the priest, Captain Ward, Pritchard, the council, and every wedding guest, Nell lifted out the lead cylinder, bearing Helena's untouched seal. Roland's confidence vanished. Vane moved toward a side door, but soldiers closed the exit. Nell placed her fingers around the sealed cap. "Your wife left the truth inside the bell," she said. "Let us hear what she wanted Ashcombe Valley to know." Nell broke Helena's wax seal, while Captain Ward, Pritchard, and the village priest watched from either side of the altar. Inside the lead cylinder were 3 tightly rolled documents, protected by oiled silk. The first was Helena's final sworn statement, witnessed by Pritchard's predecessor and an independent solicitor from London. The second was an invoice for 12 crates of blasting powder delivered to Silas Vane under authorization code RA-117. Beside the code appeared Roland Ashcombe's complete signature and personal seal. The third was a copy of Roland's secret agreement with Marlowe Ironworks. It promised Lord Adrian control of the limestone quarry immediately after a reservoir incident rendered the lower valley uninhabitable and destroyed the tenants' occupancy records. In exchange, Adrian would forgive Roland's enormous gambling debts and marry Celeste, joining the Ashcombe estate to the Marlowe Company. The agreement had been signed more than a year before the engagement celebration. Helena's statement explained how she discovered the plan. Roland originally intended to weaken one western gate and release enough water after midnight to destroy the mill row, records office, and poorest cottages without damaging the manor or upper farms. He expected the flood to be dismissed as the failure of an aging dam. Helena confronted him and threatened to send the evidence to the crown. Fearing that Roland's men would search her rooms, she created 2 hiding places. The iron box beneath the tower foundation contained only old household papers and served as a decoy. The true documents went inside the hollow bell counterweight repaired by Elias Hart, a mason she trusted, because he had refused Roland's bribes. Helena's statement ended with a warning. If she died before reaching London, her death should not be assumed accidental. The hall became utterly silent. Pritchard authenticated the former records keeper's signature. The London solicitor's embossed mark matched official documents preserved in the county archive, while the powder supplier, summoned by Captain Ward after the RA-17 register was discovered, confirmed that Roland personally authorized the shipment. Lord Adrian called the agreement a forgery, but his own company clerk recognized the numbered contract paper and admitted that Adrian had ordered the Marlowe seal applied. Celeste read the marriage clause twice before removing her engagement ring and placing it on the document. "You never wanted a daughter," she told Roland. "You wanted collateral." Adrian grabbed her arm, but Nell stepped between them. He raised his hand as though to strike the maid, and dozens of servants moved forward at once. Adrian released Celeste. Roland insisted Helena's accusations proved nothing about the recent flood. Nell answered by reconstructing the entire scheme from evidence already presented. After Helena's death, Roland delayed the quarry plan until his debts became impossible to hide. Vane stole Elias Hart's hammer from Nell's room, used Marlowe drills to prepare the western wall, and planted the hammer beside the blasting holes. He forged a maintenance request on Marlowe stationery, and placed the western gate key inside Nell's apron after the guards tied her to the tower. The flood was intended to begin after midnight, once the engagement guests had returned to the manor. But Vane removed more braces than the original plan required, because Adrian wanted the entire lower valley cleared, not merely the mill row. The damaged structure began failing hours early. Nell heard the stone groaning and rang the warning bell. forcing Roland to improvise a public punishment while repeatedly checking the time scheduled for the release. Vane's missing heel plate, blackened thumbnail, torn glove, and blasting residue placed him at the wall. The stolen tenant deeds proved the records office had been targeted before any water arrived. The bridge attack attempted to complete the isolation of the valley and kill witnesses under the appearance of continued sabotage by Nell's supposed accomplices. The glass house fire destroyed Helena's cabinet, while Locke removed evidence and manufactured testimony. Every act followed the same purpose: clear the valley, transfer the quarry, erase Roland's debts, and make a powerless Maid carry the blame. Captain Ward asked Vane whether he still maintained that Nell acted alone. Roland warned the steward to remain silent, but Adrian suddenly accused Vane of exceeding his orders and causing the uncontrolled breach. Realizing both nobles intended to sacrifice him, Vane confessed. He admitted stealing the hammer, forging Nell's signature, heating the kitchen latch to delay servants during the engagement preparations, removing the dam braces, planting the gate key, and ordering Caleb to destroy the quarry bridge. He also admitted that Roland chose Nell as the scapegoat, because her father's masonry tools and her knowledge of the dam made the accusation appear believable. More importantly, Roland believed a kind, full-figured maid, mocked by aristocrats, could never persuade powerful men to trust her over a duke. Vane's confession did not create the case. It confirmed the chain Nell had already assembled. Locke attempted to claim he had merely followed estate law, but Mercer opened the magistrate's private account book, recovered under warrant. It recorded payments from Roland and Adrian on the same dates evidence disappeared. Captain Ward arrested Locke for corruption, falsifying records, and endangering the county. Adrian was arrested for conspiracy, attempted mass harm, unlawful imprisonment, and destruction of evidence. Vane was charged with sabotaging the dam, planting false evidence, arson, and the bridge attack. Roland faced charges for conspiracy, fraud, forced displacement, obstruction, and responsibility for the disaster. A separate royal inquiry was ordered into Helena's fatal carriage accident after the documents revealed that Vane had arranged repairs to her carriage the day before her death. Roland looked toward the nobles who had laughed while Nell was tied to the tower, but none defended him. When the soldiers approached, he demanded that his title protect him. Celeste answered, "A title did not protect the people you tried to drown." Roland was placed in irons in the same courtyard where he had displayed Nell as a criminal. She did not ask that he be humiliated or harmed. "Give him the fair trial he denied me," she said. The villagers' permanent rights were restored using the surviving deed and duplicates found in the county archive. Every agreement signed under threat after the flood was canceled. Marlowe Ironworks paid for rebuilding the cottages, mill, schoolhouse, and dam. Daniel and Walter were released and compensated, while Pritchard resumed custody of the village records. Captain Ward reinstated the honest guards Roland had dismissed, and Mercer became Ashcombe Valley's new magistrate after a lawful election. Celeste permanently ended her engagement and assumed temporary management of the estate under royal supervision. Her first order opened the manor kitchens and guest rooms to displaced families without demanding land in return. She offered Nell money, property, and the freedom never to serve another aristocrat. Nell accepted a cottage for her future security, but refused to treat her years as a maid as something shameful that needed to be erased. She became head maid of Ashcombe Manor, receiving fair wages and authority to protect every servant from abuse. The county engineering board also paid her as an official local inspector, though she continued wearing her simple gray uniform whenever she worked inside the household. Her body did not become thinner, her face did not become harder, and her quiet kindness did not disappear. What changed was that no one again mistook those qualities for weakness. Months later, the bronze bell was raised from the mud and returned to a stronger tower, built on the eastern ridge. At its dedication, the entire valley gathered beneath it. Nell stood where Roland had once ordered guards to bind her. No ropes circled her wrists. No nobles laughed. Celeste invited her to sound the first alarm test, but Nell handed the rope to a group of village children and placed her strong hands over theirs. Together, they rang the bell across the rebuilt valley. This time, everyone listened,